Have you ever wondered what it was like to cook a meal 200 years ago? No microwaves, no electric mixers, no refrigerators, just an open fire and a handful of ingredients. Today, we're stepping back in time to explore the fascinating world of 19th century cooking. We'll uncover some surprising recipes, learn about the tools they used, and maybe even try to recreate a dish ourselves. So, grab your apron and let's get cooking like it's 1824. Before we dive into the recipes, let's set the scene. The 19th century was a period of immense change, and that was true in the kitchen as well. At the beginning of the century, most cooking was done over an open hearth. This wasn't just a matter of putting a pot over a fire, it was a real skill. Cooks had to manage the heat, moving pots closer or further away, using trivets and cranes to control the temperature. Imagine trying to bake a cake with just the heat from burning wood and coals. It was a constant dance of intuition and experience. As the century progressed, technology started to creep into the kitchen. The cast iron stove became more common, especially in middle-class homes. This was a game changer. It provided a more controlled, even heat source and a flat surface to cook on. Suddenly, baking became more precise, and you could have multiple pots going at once without them being directly in the flames. This invention alone transformed what was possible in home cooking. But what about the food itself? What were people actually eating? Well, it depended heavily on where you lived and your social status. For most people, especially in rural areas, the diet was based on what you could grow or raise yourself. This meant a lot of seasonal vegetables, grains like corn and wheat, and preserved foods to get through the winter. Root cellars were essential for storing potatoes, carrots, and apples. Meats were often preserved through salting, smoking, or drying. A family's diet in January would look very different from their diet in July. One of the most common staples was bread. Almost every household baked its own bread, often several times a week. It wasn't the soft, sliced bread we buy today. This was hearty, dense bread made with whole grains and often leavened with sourdough starter or yeast cultivated at home. It was the backbone of most meals, served with stews, cheese, or just a bit of butter. Let's talk about a classic 19th century dish, the meat pie. Pies were incredibly popular because they were a fantastic way to use up leftover meat and stretch ingredients. The pastry crust, often made with lard for flakiness, acted as an edible container. Fillings could be anything from beef and kidney to pigeon or rabbit. Vegetables like onions, carrots, and potatoes were added to bulk it out, and the whole thing was baked until golden brown. It was a complete, satisfying meal in one package. Another cornerstone of the 19th century diet was soup. Soups were economical, nourishing, and a great way to use every last scrap of food. A common one was pot au feu, a French-inspired dish that translates to pot on the fire. It was a slow-simmered stew of beef, root vegetables, and herbs. The broth would be served as a first course and the meat and vegetables as the main. Nothing went to waste. Even the bones were simmered for hours to extract every bit of flavor and nutrition. Now, what about dessert? People in the 19th century definitely had a sweet tooth. Without refined white sugar being widely available or affordable for everyone, many relied on molasses, honey, or maple syrup for sweetness. One very popular dessert was the Indian pudding. This is a slow-cooked pudding made from cornmeal, molasses, milk, and spices like cinnamon and ginger. It was baked in a low oven for hours until it became a thick, creamy, and deeply flavorful custard. It's a perfect example of how simple, humble ingredients could be transformed into something truly delicious. Let's look at a real recipe from a 19th century cookbook. I have a copy of Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, first published in 1861. It's a treasure trove of information. Here's her recipe for plain pound cake. The ingredients are simple: 1 pound of butter, 1 pound of flour, 1 pound of sugar, and 10 eggs. Yes, 10. The instructions say to beat the butter to a cream, then add the flour, sugar, and eggs, beating everything together for a full hour. Can you imagine doing that by hand? There were no stand mixers back then. This was a true labor of love and a workout for your arms. The cooking process was just as involved. The cake would be baked in a well-buttered tin in a brisk oven. The term brisk oven didn't refer to a specific temperature on a dial. A cook had to know their oven. They might test the heat by throwing a piece of paper inside. If it turned brown quickly, the oven was hot. It was all based on sensory cues and experience. Let's shift our focus to preservation. Without refrigerators, preserving food for the lean months was a matter of survival. Canning, or bottling as it was often called, became increasingly popular throughout the century, especially after Louis Pasteur's discoveries about bacteria. Families would spend late summer and early autumn canning fruits, vegetables, and pickles. Imagine shelves lined with gleaming jars of peaches, green beans, and tomatoes, a colorful promise of good food to come during the long, cold winter. Salting and smoking were also crucial. Pork was a very common meat because it was so well suited to preservation. Hams were cured with salt and then hung in a smokehouse for weeks. The result was a flavorful, long-lasting product that could be sliced and eaten throughout the year. Bacon was another staple, providing fat and flavor for countless dishes. Let's talk about a typical day of meals for a middle-class family around, say, 1870. Breakfast might be porridge or oatmeal, with some leftover cold meat, bread, and butter. Coffee or tea would be served as well. The main meal of the day was often dinner, served in the middle of the afternoon. This would be the most substantial meal, perhaps consisting of a roast chicken or a beef stew, with several side dishes of vegetables like boiled potatoes and cabbage. Pudding or a fruit pie would follow for dessert. Supper, in the evening, would be a much lighter meal, maybe some bread and cheese or the leftovers from dinner. Of course, this is a generalization. For the very wealthy, dining was an elaborate affair with multiple courses, expensive ingredients like oysters and turtle, and elaborate table settings. For the very poor, a meal might be nothing more than bread and a bit of cheese or a thin vegetable soup. The kitchen really was a reflection of the social and economic realities of the time. It's amazing to think about the resourcefulness and skill of 19th century cooks. They worked with limited tools and a deep understanding of their ingredients and their environment. They were chemists, physicists, and artists all in one, transforming simple, raw materials into comforting and life-sustaining meals. It makes you appreciate the convenience we have today, but also admire the lost art of hearth cooking. So, next time you're in your modern kitchen, pressing a button on the microwave or pulling out your food processor, take a moment to think about the cooks who came before us. Their legacy is in the foundational techniques and classic dishes that still grace our tables today. Exploring these old recipes isn't just a novelty. It's a way to connect with our history, one delicious bite at a time. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey back to the 19th century kitchen. If you enjoyed this trip through time, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more historical deep dives. Let me know in the comments what historical topic you'd like to see next. Until then, happy cooking!